It was late, far later than Lisa had expected to be out. The hospital shift had dragged on, and now she was walking home through the dim-lit streets, her tired feet dragging along the uneven sidewalk. A cold wind cut through the air, making her shiver slightly in the thin jacket she wore. She glanced up at the sky. A sliver of moon hung above, its pale light barely visible through the clouds. It felt like one of those nights when the world was just a little off, like something was waiting in the shadows. Lisa was used to these late nights. As a nurse, she worked long, unpredictable hours. She'd grown accustomed to the exhaustion, the aching feet, and the routine of heading home after a hard day's work. But tonight, there was something different. Something unsettling in the air. The streets, usually bustling with life at this hour, were eerily empty. Not a single car passed by. Only the flickering of streetlights and the distant sound of a dog barking in the distance interrupted the silence. Her mind was focused on the warm bed waiting for her, a cup of tea, and a moment of peace. She wasn't looking for any surprises tonight, but the universe had other plans. As Lisa passed by an old, run-down alleyway between two crumbling buildings, she noticed something strange. A figure, slumped against the brick wall, half hidden in the shadows. At first, she thought it was just a pile of trash, or maybe a person passed out from too much alcohol. But as she got closer, her instincts kicked in. The figure wasn't just any pile of garbage. It was a man. He was hunched over, his face buried in his knees, and his clothes were so torn that they barely clung to his thin frame. The faint smell of dirt and sweat reached Lisa's nose. She stopped in her tracks, her heart beating a little faster. This wasn't the kind of situation she could ignore. She'd seen people in pain before, at the hospital, in the streets, and in the homes of people who had nowhere else to go, but something about this man was different. Without thinking, Lisa approached him cautiously. She wasn't afraid of him, but her instincts told her to be careful. She gently tapped his shoulder. "Hey, are you okay?" For a moment, there was no response. He didn't even lift his head. Lisa hesitated, unsure of what to do next. But the sight of him sitting there, alone and vulnerable, tugged at her heart. She crouched down in front of him, lowering her voice to something soft. "Can I help you?" He finally stirred, lifting his head just enough to meet her eyes. His gaze was dull, empty, almost lifeless. It was as if he'd long ago given up on the world. His face was unshaven, streaked with dirt, and his eyes were clouded with exhaustion. But there was something in his eyes that made Lisa pause. It wasn't just the look of a man who'd been through hard times. It was the look of someone who had seen something that had taken away whatever spark of hope remained. I don't know," he whispered hoarsely. His voice was barely audible, like he hadn't spoken in days. Lisa's chest tightened. She could feel his pain, the weight of something unspoken hanging between them. "What's your name?" she asked gently, trying to break through his silence. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just stared at the ground as if the very act of speaking required more effort than he had left. Lisa waited. The silence stretched on longer than she expected. She was starting to wonder if he would speak at all when he finally lifted his head again, his eyes locking onto hers. "I don't have a name anymore," he muttered. "Does it really matter?" His words struck Lisa deeply. She wasn't sure if he meant that literally, or if he had simply lost his sense of identity after whatever life had thrown his way. But whatever it was, she could tell it was something dark and painful. Lisa's mind raced. She couldn't just leave him here. It wasn't safe for anyone to be out on the streets like this, especially not in the dead of night. "Listen, I'm going to help you," she said firmly. "You can't stay here. Let me get you somewhere safe." The man barely moved. He seemed too weak to even respond. Lisa glanced around the alley, scanning the street for any sign of help. But there was no one. She looked back at the man, her eyes softening with concern. "I'm a nurse. I can help. Let me get you some food or something. Just come with me." There was a long pause before he slowly nodded, as if it took all the energy he had left just to make that small motion. Lisa didn't waste another second. She helped him to his feet, supporting most of his weight as he struggled to stay upright. He smelled like he hadn't bathed in weeks, but Lisa didn't care. She focused on getting him to safety. They stumbled down the street together, the man's steps shaky and slow. Lisa kept her arm around him, trying to keep him steady. As they reached the corner, she hailed a taxi and helped him inside. The driver didn't ask questions, just gave them a glance before pulling away from the curb. Lisa directed the driver to a nearby diner. It was open 24/7, a small, greasy spot where you could always count on a cup of coffee and a warm meal. She hoped it would be enough to help the man regain some strength. When they arrived, Lisa helped him out of the taxi and inside. The waitress gave them a curious look but didn't say anything. Lisa ordered a hot meal for the man, a bowl of soup, a sandwich, and a cup of coffee. She sat across from him, watching as he barely touched the food at first. He just stared at it, almost as if he couldn't believe it was real. Lisa didn't speak for a while. She let him take his time. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his story, something buried beneath his fragile exterior. He didn't look like someone who'd fallen on hard times by accident. His eyes, his posture, his silence, they all pointed to a deeper story, one he wasn't ready to tell. After a long moment, the man finally looked up at her. "You're kind," he said softly. His voice was still raspy, but there was a sense of gratitude in his tone. "No one's treated me like this in a long time." Lisa smiled gently, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's the least I can do," she replied. "Everyone deserves help when they need it." The man nodded slowly. He glanced at the food again, then back at Lisa. "I don't know how to thank you for this. I don't know if I even deserve it." Lisa shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the way he kept lowering his head, like he was ashamed of accepting help. "No one is beyond help," she said quietly. "You just need to let people in." But the conversation quickly died. The man finished his food in silence, eating slowly, almost mechanically. Lisa didn't push him for more answers. She was simply grateful he had eaten something. When the meal was over, she paid the bill and helped him back into the taxi. She gave the driver directions to the nearest shelter. The man was too exhausted to protest. He slumped into the seat beside her, eyes closing as if the effort of staying awake was too much. When the taxi arrived at the shelter, Lisa helped him out and gave the driver a tip. She stood for a moment, watching as the man stumbled toward the door of the shelter. Then, just as she was about to turn and leave, he turned around to face her. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "You saved me tonight." Lisa nodded, but before she could say anything, he was already disappearing inside. She stood there for a moment, feeling a strange sense of closure, but also, a nagging feeling that this wasn't the last time she'd see him. Something about the encounter lingered in her mind long after she walked away. She didn't know why, but she felt like there was more to this man than met the eye. And somewhere deep inside, she knew their paths would cross again. And when they did, it would change everything. It had been 2 months since Lisa had helped the man in the alleyway. The memory of his eyes, haunted, distant, yet strangely full of something more, lingered with her. She didn't know why, but something about that night had changed her. She couldn't shake the feeling that their brief encounter had been more than just a random act of kindness. She tried not to think about it too much. After all, it was just one of those things, wasn't it? She had helped a man in need. That was all. But life had a funny way of making things come back full circle. The day started like any other. Lisa's shift at the hospital had gone smoothly, routine procedures, steady patient flow, nothing too exciting. But even on a regular day, Lisa couldn't help but notice how often her mind would wander back to that moment with the man. It wasn't like she was obsessing over him, it was just that nagging sense that something unfinished hung in the air. She glanced at the clock. Her shift was ending, and she was ready to go home, kick off her shoes, and relax. She stepped into the break room to grab her bag. As she grabbed her things, one of the nurses walked in, a wide grin on her face. "You'll never guess who's waiting outside for you," Kathy, her coworker, said with a teasing tone. Lisa furrowed her brow, confused. "What do you mean? Who?" Kathy leaned closer, lowering her voice as if she were telling a secret. "There's a man out there, tall, handsome, in a suit. He's asking for you." Lisa blinked, surprised. "A man? For me?" "Yup," Kathy said, her grin widening. "Said his name was, something like Mr. Reynolds? I think. He's been asking for you specifically. Very polite, but intense." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know anyone by the name of Mr. Reynolds, at least not anyone who would visit her at work. Kathy, noticing her confusion, continued. "He said you helped him a while ago. Something about a meal? Is that ringing any bells?" Lisa's stomach dropped. She instantly thought of the man from the alley. The man in rags. Her thoughts were swirling, but she couldn't imagine what he'd be doing here, at the hospital, in a suit. Had he somehow remembered her? Was he looking for her? "Okay, thanks," Lisa said quickly, her mind racing. She excused herself from Kathy and made her way toward the front entrance. Her heart pounded louder with each step. Was this the same man? Had he somehow tracked her down? When Lisa stepped outside, she immediately spotted him. He was standing by the entrance, looking out over the street, his back turned to her. But she recognized him instantly. The man from the alley. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his hair neatly combed, and his posture straight. He looked nothing like the disheveled figure she had helped months ago. This man was polished, refined, he had transformed into someone entirely different. He turned as soon as he heard her footsteps. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, they locked in an almost surreal silence. It was the same man, but he was different. He looked different. He looked like a completely different person. "Lisa," he said softly, a faint smile playing on his lips. She didn't know what to say. She stood frozen, unsure of what to make of this sudden turn of events. The last time she saw him, he had been a broken shell of a man, barely able to speak, let alone look this composed. Now, he stood before her, his entire demeanor exuding confidence and wealth. Lisa started, her voice faltering. "I didn't expect to see you here." He smiled again, but this time it was warmer, more genuine. "I know. I'm sorry for startling you." Lisa blinked, trying to process everything that was happening. "But, what? How?" The man stepped forward, extending his hand toward her. "I owe you a great deal more than a simple thank you, Lisa. My name is James Reynolds." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. "James Reynolds," she repeated, unsure if she had heard him correctly. You're Mr. Reynolds?" James nodded, his gaze steady and serious. "Yes. I'm the man you helped that night. I don't think I ever properly introduced myself." Lisa was still struggling to wrap her head around the sudden change. She couldn't believe it. The man who had been so weak and helpless was standing before her now, looking like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not a shelter. She tried to find the right words, but they eluded her. I don't understand. I thought you were," she trailed off, unsure how to express the confusion bubbling inside her. I was someone who had lost everything. That night, I didn't just need food. I needed someone to show me that there was still kindness left in the world. I was, at my lowest point. Lisa blinked, trying to process his words. But you were dressed in rags. I thought you were homeless. I was, James admitted, his expression darkening for a brief moment. I lost everything. My business, my home, my family. I was on the streets, trying to survive, trying to hold on to whatever dignity I had left. Lisa felt a pang of guilt, knowing how little she had truly understood about him that night. She had assumed his struggles were purely financial, that he was simply another victim of poverty. But what he was saying now suggested something much deeper. So, what happened? Lisa asked, finally finding her voice. How did you get here? James finished the question for her. He paused, his face unreadable. I had a friend, someone who owed me a favor. They helped me, gave me a chance to start over. I used what little money I had left to rebuild myself. And, well, here I am. Lisa's eyes widened. You were a millionaire? James nodded, a touch of sadness in his eyes. I was. And now? I'm someone else. There was a long silence between them. Lisa was processing everything, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of information he had just thrown at her. I never expected to see you again, she said softly, her voice filled with disbelief. James' expression softened. I know. But I've been thinking about that night for a long time. You didn't just give me food. You gave me hope. I couldn't just walk away from that. He took a step closer, his tone sincere. I wanted to thank you, Lisa. And I wanted to offer you something in return. A chance to make your life better. A way for me to show you that I haven't forgotten what you did for me. Lisa's heart raced. She didn't know what he meant, but there was something in his eyes, something intense that made her feel like this was more than just gratitude. Offer me something, she repeated. Confused but intrigued. What do you mean? James hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. He handed it to her, his hands steady. Open it. I've arranged something that I think you'll appreciate. Lisa took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at him, searching his face for any hint of what was inside, but all she saw was sincerity. She ripped open the envelope, pulled out a letter, and unfolded it carefully. Her eyes scanned the words, and as she read, her breath caught in her throat. It was an offer to join a prestigious medical research program, with a salary that was far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The letter mentioned funding for her studies, access to world-class resources, and the chance to work with leading experts in her field. Lisa's head spun as she read the words over and over again. James, I don't understand, she whispered. How did you? James smiled softly. I've been keeping an eye on you, Lisa. You've got potential, far beyond what you're giving yourself credit for. This is my way of giving back. A chance for you to have the future you deserve. Lisa was speechless. She didn't know what to say. The offer was incredible, but it felt surreal. She had never expected anything like this. Why? She asked quietly. Why me? Because, James said, his voice low, you were the first person who treated me like I mattered. You saw me. Not the man in rags, but the person inside. He stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. I owe you more than just thanks, Lisa. And I will do whatever it takes to make sure you know how much you mean to me. The air between them crackled with something unspoken, a tension that neither of them could ignore. I don't know what to say, Lisa replied, her voice shaky. This is all so much. James' gaze softened. You don't have to say anything right now. Just think about it. But know this, I'll be waiting, whenever you're ready. Lisa nodded slowly, still reeling from the shock of everything that had just happened. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Lisa couldn't sleep that night. The letter James had given her kept playing over and over in her mind, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make sense of it. The life-changing offer, the unexpected reunion, the man who had gone from being a beggar on the street to a millionaire, none of it added up. She turned over in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was racing, her thoughts scattered. What was the catch? Why was he doing this for her? It wasn't just out of gratitude, she was sure of it. People didn't make such grand gestures for no reason. She'd been around enough to know that. But still, there was something about James. The way he had looked at her, the way he spoke, there was sincerity in his eyes. She wanted to believe in him. But she also couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was something more beneath the surface. The next morning, Lisa sat at her kitchen table, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her coffee mug. The letter was still in front of her, a constant reminder of the opportunity that lay before her. A chance at a future she had never dreamed of. She could finally leave behind her struggling life, working long hours just to make ends meet. She could finally make something of herself. But at what cost? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She picked it up and saw a text message from James. "Lisa, I hope you slept well. I wanted to give you some time to think about the offer. If you're ready, I'd love to discuss it further with you today. Let me know when you're free." She stared at the message for a long time. What if this was all too good to be true? What if there was something James wasn't telling her? She had to find out. She typed a quick reply, her fingers shaking slightly. "I'm free this afternoon. Can we meet?" The response came almost instantly. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 2 p.m. Don't worry about anything. We'll talk then." Lisa didn't know whether to feel excited or uneasy. She stood up, pacing around her small apartment. She couldn't avoid this conversation. It had to happen. She had to know what James really wanted from her. By 2 p.m., Lisa was standing outside her apartment building, waiting for James. She looked down the street, her heart beating faster with every passing minute. It was a beautiful day, but her mind was far from calm. She had dressed carefully, not wanting to appear too eager, but not wanting to look disinterested either. She had to look professional, but still approachable. She didn't have to wait long. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and the driver rolled down the window. It was James. He smiled at her, his eyes warm, but there was something behind them, something unreadable. "Ready to talk?" he asked, his voice smooth. Lisa nodded, still unsure of what she was walking into. She slid into the back seat of the car, and James closed the door behind her. The car pulled away from the curb, and they began to drive through the city. The ride was quiet at first. Lisa stared out the window, trying to gather her thoughts. The city was bustling with life, people hurrying along the sidewalks, cars honking in the busy streets. Everything seemed so normal, so ordinary, and yet, here she was, in a car with a man she barely knew, heading into something that could change her life forever. James broke the silence, his voice calm and collected. "I know this all feels sudden," he said, glancing at her. "But I want you to know that I'm not doing this for any selfish reasons. I genuinely want to help you. You've got a gift, Lisa. And I want to give you the chance to use it." Lisa turned to face him, her curiosity piqued. "A gift?" she repeated. "What do you mean?" James smiled faintly. "You're a nurse, Lisa. You help people every day. But you also have a mind that's capable of so much more. Your potential, your ability to heal, to understand, to care, goes far beyond just being a nurse. You have the capacity to change lives, to innovate, to lead. Lisa didn't know how to respond. She had always been passionate about her work, but the idea that she had some grand potential that could change the world seemed far-fetched. "Thank you, but I'm just a nurse," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything big. I've always just tried to do my job the best I can." "I understand," James said, his tone gentle. "But this isn't just about what you do now. It's about what you could do in the future. The program I'm offering you isn't just a job. It's an opportunity to make a real difference. You'd be working alongside some of the brightest minds in the medical field. You'd have access to resources, funding, and mentorship that you've never dreamed of." Lisa looked at him, still skeptical. "But why me? Why offer me this?" James didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath, as though weighing his words carefully. "I'll be honest with you, Lisa," he said finally. "There's more to this than just helping you. I'm starting something, a new project. A project that requires someone with your skills, someone who understands people, who has a true passion for healing." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "What kind of project?" James hesitated. "It's complicated. But I need someone I can trust. Someone who will be committed to the cause. I need you, Lisa." Her mind raced. What kind of project could he be talking about? Why was it so secretive? "And what's the catch?" she asked, her voice sharp. "There has to be one. Why else would you be offering all of this to me?" James' eyes flickered, and for the first time, Lisa saw something other than calm in his expression. It was as if he had been holding something back. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. He smiled, though the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "There's no catch," he said softly. "I want to give you a future, Lisa. But I also want you to understand that this project, this opportunity, will require everything from you. You'll have to be all in." Lisa took a deep breath. The stakes were higher than she had expected. But she still wasn't sure if she could trust him. He was offering her a future she had always dreamed of, but there was something off. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more he wasn't telling her. "Let me think about it," she said, her voice firm. James nodded, though she saw the slight flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Of course. I'm not pressuring you, Lisa. Take all the time you need. But just remember, when you're ready, I'll be here." The car stopped in front of a luxurious building. James opened the door for her, and Lisa stepped out onto the pavement, still lost in her thoughts. As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. She had made a choice, but the consequences of that choice were still unclear. And that was the most unsettling thing of all. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to her as she walked away from the car. The crisp breeze outside the building felt almost too cold, too harsh. She wrapped her arms around herself as she made her way down the sidewalk, her mind racing. What was James really offering her? The project he had mentioned was still unclear, a secret he refused to elaborate on. Every time she tried to press for more information, he changed the subject or gave vague responses. But what truly bothered her was the way he had looked at her, like he knew something she didn't. She couldn't tell whether he was being honest or manipulating her. And then there was the way he had talked about her potential. Was he flattering her, or did he truly see something in her that no one else had? For years, Lisa had struggled with self-doubt. She had always felt like the underdog, never truly believing she could be more than just a nurse, someone who quietly did her job, day in and day out. Now, here was James, offering her a life of opportunity and grandeur, something she had never even imagined. But was it all real? Her phone buzzed again, breaking her train of thought. She pulled it out and saw another message from James. "Lisa, I know you're thinking things over, but I'd like to meet again tomorrow to talk further. Please let me know when you're free." She stood still for a moment, debating. Should she meet him again? Should she trust him enough to take the next step? She had so many questions, but only one way to find answers. After a long moment of contemplation, she replied, I'm free tomorrow afternoon. Let's meet at 3. The next day arrived all too quickly, and Lisa found herself standing in front of her apartment again, this time dressed in a more casual outfit. She had decided not to go all out in her appearance, no reason to overdo it when she wasn't even sure about what was happening. When the black car pulled up to the curb again, she took a deep breath and climbed inside. James greeted her with his usual calm smile, but there was something different about him today. A quiet intensity in his eyes that made her heart race. Ready to talk? He asked as the car pulled away from the curb. Yeah, Lisa replied, though her voice betrayed the uncertainty she felt. But I need you to be honest with me, James. I need to know what you really want. What is this project? Why me? James didn't immediately respond. His gaze remained steady on the road ahead, but Lisa could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The silence stretched between them, thick with anticipation. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. I can't tell you everything just yet, Lisa. There are things that need to stay under wraps, for now, anyway. But what I can tell you is this, you're not just being offered a job. You're being offered a role in something much bigger than you've ever imagined. Lisa's brows furrowed. Bigger? How much bigger? James' smile remained in place, but his eyes turned serious. I've been building a network. A team of people, doctors, scientists, researchers, who are focused on creating something revolutionary. We want to change the way medicine works. We want to make treatments more accessible to everyone. We want to eliminate the barriers that stop people from getting the care they need. Lisa couldn't help but feel a spark of interest. This sounded like something she could get behind. But she still had so many questions. That sounds incredible, she said carefully. But why me? Why would someone like me be part of something so big? James turned to face her, his expression serious. You have something unique. A combination of skills and empathy that can't be taught. You understand people, Lisa. You connect with them. That's why I need you. Lisa stared at him, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. Could she trust him? Could she truly be part of something that could change the world? The car slowed as they approached a building, a massive glass tower that gleamed in the afternoon sun. It was nothing like she had ever seen before. The sleek modern design, the way the light reflected off the surface, made it look more like a high-tech fortress than a place of work. James glanced at her. This is where it all happens. This is the headquarters of the project. Lisa's heart skipped a beat as they parked. She had no idea what to expect, but something in her gut told her this was it. The moment that would change everything. As they entered the building, Lisa couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the size of it all. The grand lobby, the futuristic decor, the people walking around with purpose. This wasn't just a project. It was a movement. And it seemed like she was standing at the center of it. James led her down a long corridor to a private office. It was sleek and minimalist, but the walls were lined with pictures of successful treatments, medical breakthroughs, and smiling faces of people who had been helped. Here, James said as he motioned to a chair. Have a seat. Lisa sat down, feeling the weight of the moment press on her chest. James closed the door and turned to face her. Lisa, he began, I need to be clear. This is not just a career opportunity. This is your chance to be part of something that will shape the future of healthcare. You could be at the forefront of a medical revolution. Her eyes widened. This was more than she could have imagined. This wasn't just a job, it was a chance to make a real impact, to change lives on a global scale. But at what cost? she still couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. James continued, "But I'll be honest with you. This is not easy. It will demand everything from you. The people involved are all highly dedicated, and there are expectations. You won't be able to just dip in and out. Once you commit, you'll be all in." Lisa swallowed hard. The pressure was mounting, but she couldn't deny that a part of her was drawn to the idea. The chance to be a part of something groundbreaking was too big to ignore. "I'm not sure what I'm getting into," she said quietly. "I mean, it sounds amazing, but I don't know if I'm ready to give up everything I've built. My life is already difficult enough." James' eyes softened. "I understand, Lisa. But think about what you could become. Think about what you could achieve. You don't have to give up everything you are right now, but you have the chance to become something more. This could be your legacy." Lisa closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The weight of his words pressed on her. A legacy. She had never thought about leaving a legacy before. She had never imagined that she could be more than just a nurse, just someone who helped people in small ways. But maybe, just maybe, this was her chance. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I'm in." James' face lit up with a smile, one that was both relieved and excited. "I knew you'd come around, Lisa. You're going to do great things." The next few days were a blur of activity. Lisa met with more people involved in the project. She signed non-disclosure agreements, toured the facility, and began to learn about the work they were doing. But through it all, the questions continued to linger in the back of her mind. What exactly was James up to? What kind of man was he really? And why had he chosen her? The answers weren't coming fast enough. But one thing was certain, her life was never going to be the same again. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Lisa's life had completely changed since she accepted James' offer. No longer was she just a nurse scraping by, struggling with long shifts and a never-ending to-do list. Now, she was a part of something larger, a team working on a groundbreaking medical project that could change the world. At first, everything seemed perfect. The work was fascinating, and the people she met were all passionate and highly skilled. Every day, she was learning something new, pushing herself further than she ever thought possible. James had kept his promise. He made sure she had everything she needed to succeed, from advanced training to a well-equipped office space. And though the pressure was intense, Lisa thrived in it. But there was something that still didn't sit right with her. James, despite his kindness and apparent generosity, remained a mystery. He was always around, always watching, but never truly opening up to her. There were moments when their conversations would turn strangely cold, almost as though he was hiding something. His responses to her questions about the project often skirted around the details. It wasn't that he was lying, but there was a deliberate choice in what he chose to leave out. Lisa couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was missing a piece of the puzzle. She had always prided herself on her instincts, and they were screaming at her now. There was more to this than he was letting on. She had seen enough people in her life to know when something felt off, and this situation was no different. One afternoon, Lisa was working late in the lab, running tests and reviewing some patient data. The team had been pushing for a breakthrough, but it felt like the walls were closing in. There was so much pressure. The project, while noble, was veering into territory that felt increasingly personal. The stakes weren't just professional anymore. James was making it clear that this was about something bigger, something that involved the future of medicine. But what did that really mean? As Lisa was sorting through some paperwork, she heard the soft click of the door opening behind her. She turned quickly, expecting to see one of her colleagues, but instead, James stood there, leaning against the frame. "Lisa," he said, his voice calm but intense. "I need to talk to you." She stood up, her heart racing. There was something in his eyes, something guarded and urgent. She nodded, stepping out from behind the desk. "What's going on, James?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've been acting strange lately. I've been asking questions, but you keep avoiding them." James' expression softened, but only slightly. "I know you have questions. But there are some things I can't tell you yet. You need to trust me, Lisa." "Trust you?" she repeated, her voice rising a little. "How am I supposed to trust you when you won't even tell me what's really going on? You've brought me into this project, but you're keeping me in the dark. I can't help but feel like you're hiding something." For a moment, there was silence. James didn't speak. His gaze was fixed on her, intense but unreadable. Then, slowly, he walked into the room and closed the door behind him. "Listen," he said quietly, "there's a reason I've kept certain things from you. It's not because I don't trust you, it's because I do. But there's something you need to understand. This project, it's bigger than both of us. And the work we're doing isn't just about saving lives." Lisa felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean? What's it really about?" James' eyes flickered, as though weighing whether or not to say more. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "There's a technology, Lisa. Something that we've developed, but it's not just about medical treatment. It's about control. Power. We've discovered a way to manipulate the human body on a genetic level. We can alter how people age, how they heal, even how they think." Lisa blinked, her mind racing. What? "We're talking about genetic modification," James continued, his voice steady now. "It's revolutionary. It's what the world's been waiting for. But we're not just curing diseases, Lisa. We're designing the future of humanity." The words hit her like a ton of bricks. Genetic modification? Creating a new world order with the power to alter human biology? She had read about such things in science fiction, but never had she imagined that it could be real. And now James was telling her that they were involved in something far darker and more complex than she had realized. "Are you saying, you want to change people?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You want to play God?" James looked at her, his eyes hardening. "We're not playing God, Lisa. We're advancing human evolution. You've seen the results. The trials we've done have saved lives. People who were supposed to die are living. Their bodies are healing faster than ever. This is the future. And I'm giving you a chance to be a part of it." Lisa's head was spinning. She couldn't process it all. There had been so much focus on saving lives and changing medicine, but this was different. This was about control, about altering the very fabric of what it meant to be human. She felt nauseous, a chill running down her spine. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything right now," James said, his tone softening. "I'm not asking you to make a decision. But I want you to understand what you're really a part of. You've been working on this project, and you've been doing amazing work, but it's time to face the truth. This isn't just about helping people. It's about shaping the future." Lisa took a step back, her mind reeling. The weight of his words hung in the air, suffocating her. She had never signed up for this. She had never imagined that the project she had joined would be about something so much bigger, and darker, than she could ever have prepared for. "You've been working with us for a reason, Lisa," James continued, his voice almost pleading now. "You have the skills. The instincts. You're the one who can help us take it to the next level. You're the key." Lisa didn't know how to respond. She had joined this project thinking she was helping to make the world a better place, not realizing that she was being drawn into something that could destroy everything she believed in. "I need time," she said finally, her voice shaky. "I need time to think." James didn't argue. He simply nodded, as though he had been expecting that response. "Take all the time you need. But understand this. Lisa, this is bigger than you and me. This is a turning point in history." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the crushing weight of the truth. The days that followed were a blur. Lisa couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She kept replaying that conversation in her head over and over again. The idea of genetic modification, of altering humanity itself, felt like something out of a nightmare. But it was real. And she was in the middle of it. Her mind was in turmoil. She had been so eager to be a part of something great, something revolutionary. But now, the true cost of that opportunity was becoming painfully clear. What kind of future was James building? And was she willing to be a part of it? She knew she couldn't ignore what she had learned. She had to make a choice. But the choice was harder than she had ever imagined. The weight of the decision crushed Lisa every waking moment. She could hardly concentrate on the work in front of her, her mind constantly veering back to the conversation she had with James. The project, the technology, the future of humanity, it was too much to absorb. It was as though the world had been flipped upside down, and she was caught in the middle of a storm, unable to see the way out. She hadn't returned home in days. Lisa had moved into one of the guest rooms at the facility, not wanting to be alone with her thoughts. The sterile, clinical walls of the building now seemed suffocating. Every corner felt like it was watching her, judging her, daring her to make a decision that would change everything. In the days following that fateful conversation, she had done what she could to learn more about the project. She dug into the files, read the research papers, and met with the scientists involved. She even had private meetings with some of the other key members of the team, trying to understand their motivations, trying to see if there was any shred of truth in James' words. The deeper she looked, the more unsettling it became. The project was not just about saving lives. It was not about curing diseases or healing injuries faster. No, the truth was much darker. The technology they were developing was a form of control, a way to dictate how people lived, how they aged, and how they could be manipulated. Lisa had always believed in the power of medicine to heal. It was why she had become a nurse in the first place, to help people. But this was different. This was about rewriting the rules of life itself, playing with genetic codes, altering the very foundation of human existence. She could feel the pull, the lure of something so powerful that it tempted even the most grounded individuals to cross lines they would have never considered before. It was the kind of power that could shape the future. James was offering her a chance to be part of that future, a future she couldn't deny would change the world. But was it a world she wanted to be a part of? The question had eaten at her for days. Lisa wasn't the type of person to back down from a challenge, but she had always been guided by one simple principle: helping people. She had devoted her life to others, easing their pain, making their days a little brighter. But now, she was being asked to make a decision that went far beyond helping. This was about controlling life itself. She paced back and forth in her room, her fingers running through her hair in frustration. The bright lights of the lab flickered in the hallway outside, casting long shadows that only added to the sense of dread creeping into her thoughts. She had no one to talk to, no one to lean on. The people she had grown close to at the facility had all been too wrapped up in the project, too consumed by the promise of something greater. Lisa's phone buzzed, pulling her from her spiral of thoughts. It was a message from James. "I want to meet you, Lisa. I think it's time we talk about the next step. Come to my office." She stared at the message, feeling the familiar knot tighten in her stomach. What next step? What did he want from her now? For the first time, Lisa felt a sense of dread wash over her, not just about the project, but about James himself. Was he truly looking out for her, or was he simply using her as a pawn in his grand plan? With a deep breath, she typed back. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." James' office was just as sleek and modern as the rest of the facility. The glass walls allowed for an unobstructed view of the city skyline, but it was all too cold, too impersonal. There was no warmth in the room, no sense of comfort. It felt like a place for decisions, not conversations. James stood by the window, staring out at the skyline when Lisa entered. He didn't turn to face her at first, allowing the silence to stretch between them. His posture was stiff, his hands clasped behind his back. Lisa cleared her throat, trying to steady her nerves. "You wanted to talk." James finally turned to face her, and his eyes seemed colder than before, more calculating. "I know you've been questioning everything, Lisa. I can see it in your eyes. But I need you to understand that this is bigger than you, bigger than me. It's about what we can do for humanity." Lisa shook her head, her voice trembling. "It's not about humanity anymore, James. It's about control. You're talking about altering people's biology, changing who they are. That's not helping anyone. That's playing God." James' expression didn't change. He simply stared at her, his gaze unwavering. "You're wrong. What we're doing is evolving humanity. We're creating a new world, a better world. A world where disease doesn't exist, where aging is a thing of the past, where people live longer, healthier lives. What we're doing isn't control, Lisa. It's freedom." Lisa's heart pounded in her chest as the words hit her like a punch to the gut. Freedom? Was this what James really believed? Or was he just so wrapped up in his own vision that he couldn't see the dangers of what he was doing? "I don't know if I can be a part of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always believed in helping people, in making their lives better, but this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't right." James' expression hardened. "You don't get to make that choice anymore, Lisa. You're in this. We're all in this." Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" James took a step closer, his voice low and intense. "You've already seen the results, Lisa. You've already seen what we've done. You're already involved. And now, it's time to make your choice. You can stay and be part of this, or you can walk away. But understand this, you can't undo what's been done. You're too deep into this now. The choice you make will determine everything." Lisa's knees went weak, and she had to steady herself against the edge of his desk. This wasn't just a career choice. This wasn't about getting a bigger paycheck or a better office. This was about deciding the future of humanity. She had never imagined that her life, her work, would come to this. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice shaking. James seemed to soften, his expression shifting for a brief moment, almost as though he were trying to reach her. "I know this is hard, Lisa. But sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that change everything. You're a part of this now. And you can either make a difference, or you can walk away and let others take the reins." Lisa closed her eyes, the weight of his words crashing down on her. She had spent her life helping others, fighting for what was right. But this was not the life she had envisioned. She had never asked for this kind of power, never dreamed of being a part of something so massive. But the decision had to be made. Slowly, she opened her eyes and looked at James. She could feel the power of the choice in the air, thick and heavy. "I need to think," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. James nodded. "I understand. Take your time. But understand, Lisa, the clock is ticking." Over the next few days, Lisa found herself at a crossroads. She had always been a woman of action, of purpose, but now she felt paralyzed by the enormity of the choice before her. Could she really walk away from everything she had worked for? Could she turn her back on a chance to change the world? But deep down, she knew the answer. She had seen enough. She had heard enough. This wasn't about helping people, it was about control. It was about something darker than anything she had ever imagined. Lisa had always believed that medicine was about healing, not manipulation. She had joined this project to make a difference, but now, she realized that the price of that difference was too high. With a heavy heart, she walked into James' office one last time. Her mind was made up. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice steady but filled with sadness. James' expression faltered for the briefest moment, but then he nodded. "I knew you'd make this choice. I just didn't think it would happen so soon." "I can't be a part of this," Lisa said, shaking her head. "Not anymore. I've seen what you're really doing, and I won't be a part of it." James didn't argue. He simply stood there, watching her as she turned to leave. But as she reached the door, he called out to her. "You've made a mistake, Lisa. You'll regret it." Lisa paused, her hand on the door handle, but she didn't turn around. "Maybe. But I'd rather regret walking away than regret what I might become." With that, she left the room, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of the decision lift from her shoulders. Lisa left the facility that day, walking away from the life she had been building, the future that had seemed so bright. But she did so knowing one thing: she had stayed true to herself. And in the end, that was all that mattered.